The billionaire lay back in his leather recliner, eyes half closed, pretending to sleep as the morning light passed over his face. He wasn't resting. He was watching, waiting, testing. The money, 12 thick stacks of clean $100 bills, lay scattered across the glass table like bait. And right on time, Keisha, his new black maid, stepped quietly into the room. She didn't see him watching, but he saw everything. The billionaire, Carter, had done this test before many times, but the cold little smile at the corner of his mouth tonight carried something different, something darker. As Keisha walked in, her shoes soft on the marble floor, Carter inhaled slowly, forcing the rhythm of fake sleep. He expected her eyes to widen. He expected shaky hands. He expected temptation. But what happened next was something even he wasn't prepared for. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. Keisha paused at the table. She stared at the scattered bills, not with greed, not with fear, but with a look Carter couldn't read, a look that made his chest tighten without understanding why. She gathered the bills slowly, stacking them into perfect towers. Precise, careful, no shaking hands, no hesitation, no attempt to hide anything. Carter's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. She wasn't reacting the way every other maid had. She didn't look impressed. She didn't look scared. She looked disappointed. Then Keisha reached into her apron pocket. Carter's breath stopped. He expected a wallet, a hidden bag, something to steal with, but instead, she pulled out a small yellow sticky note, wrote something with her own pen, placed it gently on top of the stacked cash, and without touching a single dollar more, she continued cleaning, calm, humming softly under her breath, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Carter had run this test for years, but no one, absolutely no one, had ever responded like that. He had no idea his little test had just awakened the wrong woman. The mansion always felt cold in the mornings, but Keisha moved through it with quiet steadiness, the same steady rhythm she carried everywhere she went. The staff barely knew her. She didn't gossip, didn't complain, didn't rush. She worked with the calm discipline of someone who'd learned long ago that noise only drew the wrong kind of attention. Carter watched her more now. Not openly. He was too proud for that. But the security cameras, the mirror hallways, and his silent footsteps made sure he never missed a moment. Yesterday's reaction, or lack of reaction, had crawled under his skin. Most people failed the money test within 10 seconds. Some stole a bill, some froze, some pretended not to see it, but kept glancing back. But Keisha, she moved like someone who had already seen worse things in life than a billionaire's games. This morning, she dusted the bookshelves in his private lounge. His eyes followed her from the doorway. "Miss, Keisha, isn't it?" His tone carried the quiet superiority of a man used to people stopping everything when he spoke. "Yes, sir," she replied gently, not turning her head. No fear, no eagerness, just respect, polite, controlled, and closed off. "You've adjusted quickly," Carter said, stepping closer. "Most new staff take time to learn the rhythm of this house." Keisha nodded. "I understand routines well." But it wasn't her words that bothered him. It was the way she said them, as if his house was a predictable one, not her life. He walked to the table where she had placed the stacks of money the night before. Her sticky note was still there. "Your money was messy. I organized it for you." Carter read it again, jaw tightening. There was something almost insulting about how neat her handwriting was. "You know," he said, watching her closely, "most people would not have ignored what I left out yesterday." She paused her dusting, looked at him calmly, and answered, "I don't take what isn't mine, sir." The simplicity of the statement irritated him more than any excuse would have. As Keisha moved toward the next room, Carter followed slowly, hand behind his back, expression darkening. He didn't know why, but something about her quiet confidence made him feel smaller inside his own mansion. And men like Carter didn't like feeling small. Tomorrow, he decided, the test would get harder, much harder. Carter didn't wait long before trying again. By midweek, The tension inside the mansion had changed. The air felt tighter, heavier, like the house itself sensed that something cruel was coming. Keisha finished polishing the hallway mirrors when she noticed Carter standing behind her reflection, too close, too silent. She didn't jump. She didn't flinch. She simply lowered the cloth and turned around slowly. "You missed a spot," he said flatly. She checked the mirror. It was spotless. "Yes, sir," she murmured anyway, because disagreeing with men like him never made life easier. Carter stepped past her and placed his phone openly on the hallway table. The screen unlocked, messages popping up one after another. Investment leaks, confidential numbers, names of people she shouldn't be reading. Then he walked away without saying a word. Keisha stared at the phone, not because she was tempted, but because she understood exactly what this was. Another test, another trap, another way to measure what he called character and what she knew was really control. She gently turned the phone face down and returned to her work. But Carter was watching from the corner, disappointment tightening his jaw. No reaction. Again, later he escalated. He forgot his wallet on the kitchen counter, cards peeking out like shiny invitations. He left confidential documents on the dining table, half opened, purposely misaligned. He even tossed a diamond cufflink under the edge of the rug, waiting to see if she'd pocket it. Keisha fixed everything quietly, without touching what wasn't hers. But on Thursday afternoon, Carter crossed a line he had never crossed before. As she wiped down the counter, he leaned against the doorway and said casually, "Tell me something, Keisha. People from your background ever get tempted in houses like mine?" She froze. Not visibly, but enough for Carter to feel it. "My background?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, smiling without warmth. "People who grew up with less. People who aren't used to money. It does something to them." In that moment, something in Keisha's eyes changed. Not anger, not fear, something deeper, something Carter couldn't read. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. She steadied her breath and answered quietly, "Temptation doesn't come from having less, sir. It comes from wanting what isn't yours." For the first time, Carter felt a flicker of embarrassment, strong enough that he looked away. But instead of stopping him, her calm answer only fueled something darker inside him. He needed to break her. He needed to win. And the next test wouldn't just be intrusive. It would be personal. Carter didn't sleep that night. Not because he was worried, but because he was obsessed. Keisha's calm answers, her steady eyes, the way nothing he did seemed to shake her. It gnawed at him. It bruised his ego in a way he wasn't prepared for. Men like him were used to being feared, obeyed, impressed. But Keisha? She treated him like he was just another man standing in a house filled with empty noise. The next morning, he waited in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through emails while she prepared the coffee. He watched her hands move, steady, precise, controlled, as if every gesture was a quiet refusal to play his games. "You're very disciplined," he said without looking up. "Thank you, sir." Almost too disciplined. She paused, just for a second, and that was enough for Carter to continue. "You don't react. You don't flinch. You don't even seem surprised by anything in this house. Most people," he leaned closer, "aren't like that." Keisha set the spoon down gently. "I do my work, sir. Nothing more." But something in her tone made him straighten. It wasn't disrespect. It wasn't fear. It was boundaries. Something he wasn't used to hearing from anyone he paid. And that alone irritated him more than any insult would have. Later that afternoon, he initiated his next move. He accidentally left his laptop open on the living room sofa, its screen filled with emails, real ones this time, about investors' projects and financial decisions, things worth millions. Keisha walked in, saw the computer, closed it without reading a single line, and continued dusting the shelves. She didn't even blink twice. Carter watched from the security feed, jaw tightening. Why wasn't she reacting? Why wasn't she curious? Why wasn't she breaking? By evening, he escalated again. He stepped into the laundry room where Keisha was folding sheets, stood uncomfortably close, and said, "You know, I can always tell when someone is hiding something." Keisha folded another sheet without looking at him. "Sir, I don't hide anything." But her hand slowed just slightly, and that tiny detail hit him like a spark. There it was, a flicker, a crack, a sign that she wasn't as unbothered as she pretended. Now he leaned in. "You sure about that? Because something tells me you're not here just for a paycheck." Her eyes lifted, only for a moment, calm, watchful. But behind that calm, something deep, something guarded, something he couldn't name. And the power in the room shifted. Not toward him, away from him. For the first time, Carter felt it clearly. She wasn't afraid of him, and that terrified him in ways he didn't understand. Carter's curiosity had twisted into something sharper now, something that kept him pacing his own mansion like a stranger. Every room he entered, he expected to see Keisha slip, panic, react anything. But she never did. On Friday morning, he tried something he'd never risked with any other employee. He left the door to his private study slightly open, a room he guarded like a vault. She didn't glance at the papers. She didn't approach the desk. She didn't even lift a brow. She closed the door gently and moved on. Carter's pulse spiked with frustration. How was she slipping through every trap like air? But then, something changed. That afternoon, he found his office slightly different. Not much, barely noticeable, but enough. The folders on his desk weren't where he left them. Not missing, not opened, just realigned. A perfect symmetry he hadn't created. And on the corner of the desk, barely visible, a single fingerprint. It wasn't his. That was the moment the hook snapped tight. Something wasn't adding up. She wasn't tempted. She wasn't scared. She wasn't weak. She wasn't clueless. She was aware, watching him, studying him, matching his tests with tests of her own. And for the first time since she'd stepped into his mansion, Carter felt the unmistakable sensation that the roles were changing. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it. He searched the room again, slower this time. A pen slightly angled. A book moved an inch. His chair not facing the exact direction. He remembered. Not enough to accuse her. Not enough to confront her. But enough to tell him one thing with chilling certainty. Keisha wasn't the one being tested anymore. She was the one taking notes. And he was the subject. Something was happening in his own mansion. Something he couldn't see, couldn't control, couldn't predict. And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt the cold bite of uncertainty. Carter's world began slipping long before he realized it. It started with small things. Numbers not matching in his financial reports, calls from partners asking questions he didn't like, meetings that suddenly felt tense without reason. But the real shift came when he entered his study late Sunday night and found something he had never seen before. His safe was slightly open, not unlocked, not forced, just a hairline gap. As if someone had checked it, then closed it gently. His chest tightened. He scanned the room, breathing harder, eyes darting across shelves, papers, drawers. Nothing was missing. Nothing obvious was touched. But everything felt violated. Keisha was the only person who'd been near this room in weeks. On Monday morning, his patience snapped. He stormed into the kitchen where Keisha was arranging breakfast trays, the same calm rhythm she always worked with. But this time, he stepped closer, too close, as if trying to corner the truth out of her. "You've been going through my things," he said quietly, dangerously. Keisha didn't turn, didn't flinch. She set a glass down and replied, "I only clean, sir." "You expect me to believe that?" His voice cracked with anger. My study was moved. My safe was touched. She faced him fully now, and the expression on her face was unlike anything he'd seen from her before. Not fear, not innocence, but a tired kind of strength. "Sir, if someone touched your safe, maybe it wasn't the maid," she said softly. Something about her tone hit him harder than the words, because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't scared. It was truthful in a way he couldn't process. He stepped back, uneasy. Later that day, he checked the security footage. Clip after clip loaded, but each one from the past week showed the same error. Corrupted file, unreadable footage. All the nights he had tested her. All the moments she had been left alone in the mansion. All gone. Someone knew exactly which hours mattered. Someone had erased proof without leaving a trace. And Carter felt something he had never felt before in his own home. He was the one being watched. That evening, while reviewing his accounts again, he found one last detail, the one that shattered him completely. A single folder on his desktop was renamed, "You should be careful what you test." His hands trembled as he clicked it open, expecting stolen data, threats, demands. But inside, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Not a file, not a note, just an empty folder. Empty, but loud enough to collapse his confidence in one blow. Because it wasn't theft. It wasn't blackmail. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message, a warning. Keisha hadn't come to take anything from him. She'd come to show him what he couldn't handle, vulnerability. For the first time in his life, the billionaire realized he was losing control. Not to greed, not to power struggles, but to a woman he had underestimated from day one. And justice was no longer a distant fear. It was already in his house. Carter didn't leave his office for hours. He sat in that leather chair like a man staring at the ruins of a kingdom he thought was unbreakable. Every shadow in the room felt heavier. Every sound in the mansion felt sharper. And for the first time, he wasn't thinking about his money or his image or his power. He was thinking about her. Keisha, the woman he tried to trap, the woman he tried to expose, the woman he thought was too simple, too harmless, too ordinary. And yet she was the one who had quietly dismantled the only thing he truly feared losing, his sense of control. As sunset painted the mansion in dim orange, Carter finally walked out of the office, exhausted. The house, usually comforting to his ego, suddenly felt like a stranger's home. Too big, too quiet, too aware of him. He found Keisha in the dining room, finishing her shift by aligning cutlery with the same gentle precision she always had. He stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. Pride stopped him from apologizing. Fear stopped him from accusing her again. Shame, something he had never allowed himself to feel, pressed into his chest. "You kept things very organized today," he said stiffly. Keisha didn't look up. "Thank you, sir." He swallowed. The silence between them felt heavier than any confrontation they'd had. "You've worked here for a few weeks now," he continued. "If the job isn't suitable, I can arrange for something easier." It was the closest he had ever come to admitting defeat. Keisha placed a final fork on the table, aligning it perfectly, then turned in with calm eyes that had never once reflected fear of him. "Sir," she said quietly, "I don't need easier. I just need respect." Her words didn't rise in anger. They didn't tremble. They didn't accuse. They simply existed, sharp enough to cut, soft enough to echo. Carter opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Keisha picked up her cleaning cloth, walked past him, and headed toward the exit with the same unshakable grace she'd carried since the day she arrived. And as the door closed behind her, something finally clicked inside Carter's chest. The truth he'd been fighting all week. She had never been the one on trial. He had. That night, for the first time in years, Carter slept without arrogance, without certainty, without feeling untouchable. And somewhere deep inside, he knew he would never run those tests again. Because one black woman with steady hands and an unbreakable spirit had done what no one else had managed to do in his entire life. She made him face himself. If you believe stories like this should never stay hidden, share this video and subscribe for more dark truths.